On here. Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so we are good to go. Um, so thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Taylor Alpert. I am an MSW and MPH graduate candidate here at Wayne State. And I will be leading the presentation today and the panel discussion as well. It's all about post-pandemic life and alcohol use. The webinar today is going to cover a variety of topics. We'll be talking about day drinking culture, hangovers, and post-pandemic life, along with anxiety and how that relates to alcohol use. So let's get started. So just to give like a little bit of an overview of what we're going to do today, I will go through the presentation, and then after that, we're going to have the rest of the time for panel discussion, and then right at the very end, we'll have some time for Q&A. So if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, just please feel free to post them in the chat, and then at the very end, we can try and cover as many questions as we get with the rest of the time. So before we get into the big topics here today, we just want to touch base on why this really matters. So there's a few different moving parts and statistics and data that I really want to like touch base on before we get into this. And so the first thing is, if most of you probably know this at this point, but pandemic alcohol sales increased a lot, especially during the first part of the pandemic when we had a lot of shutdowns occurring. And research shows that it increased by alcohol sales increased by 54% during the first month of shutdowns and the pandemic, which was March of 2020. In addition to this, college student alcohol statistics from 2019 show us that in any given month, college students ages 18 to 22, 53% of them are actively using alcohol. And even more so, 33% of these students are binge drinking and 8% of these students are heavy drinking. So just kind of keeping those numbers in the back of your head too as we move through this presentation. And the last little piece of information is all about traumatic event research, which shows us that like other traumatic events like Hurricane Katrina and 9/11 have seen an increase in alcohol use and an alcohol dependency after those types of traumatic and stressful life events. So in this case, with COVID-19, we've experienced so much trauma and grief for many of us out there. And as a society, we might be more susceptible to increased alcohol use since the pandemic has begun. And so all of these like variables and statistics culminate into this idea that, now that we have a vaccine and things are starting to go back to what we might call a new normal, we may experience these lingering effects of anxiety and stress from the pandemic and be more likely to misuse alcohol or even to binge drink as we navigate post-pandemic life. And this also has implications specifically for college students who have, missed out on almost an entire year and even more of the traditional college life, and might be, anticipating a return to normal campus activities. So before, again, we get into the bigger topics, just wanted to touch base on what binge drinking is, because this will kind of come up a few times throughout the presentation today. So binge drinking is what the NIAAA defines as a drinking pattern or drinking habit where your blood alcohol content or concentration is going to 0.08 or higher. And what this really means for men is drinking, like having 5 or more drinks in a 2-hour time frame, and for women having 4 or more drinks in that 2-hour time frame as well. And then, when we say one drink, what does that really mean? It technically it means a half ounce or 14 grams of absolute alcohol. And within this could be, a 12 ounce of beer or like a cooler drink, a 5-ounce glass of wine, or one shot of liquor within a mixed drink. And I apologize in advance if you guys hear any dogs barking. They like to bark when the mailman comes. So, um, with that being said, I'm going to jump into our main topic today, which is all about day drinking culture, or the first main topic for today. So, to start off with some more data, the American Addiction Center reports that 29% of adults day drink on a weekly basis. And within this number, men are usually having around 6.5 drinks on average, and women are having 4.8 drinks on average. So if you think back to a couple slides ago, that is binge drinking right there. And so again, keeping that number in the back of our head and really understanding what sorts of negative health implications that might have for someone. And so the top four like day drinks that they've reported that people consume are number one is champagne, number two is beer, number three is vodka, and number four is tequila. And if you look at the activities below, you can maybe notice that some of these drinks sort of correspond to those activities. Like if you're going out for brunch, you might be having a mimosa, and a mimosa has champagne in it. So, um, with that being said, also sporting events and games, people are drinking beer, and also the activities that are associated with day drinking tend to be like bar crawls or what some people might call booze cruises. And then even younger generations, particularly college students, talk about going to a darty or a day party. What they, how it's put together as a word. But these activities are pretty typical for college campuses. And, while they might be really fun activities, they can have also some pretty severe negative outcomes and consequences of those things that we really want to be aware of and, make sure that people are having safe habits and drinking responsibly as well. So, some of these negative consequences of day drinking can include driving under the influence, hangovers, hookups, and or sexual assault. And while a hangover might feel like kind of a temporary unwanted negative feeling after your time spent day drinking, driving under the influence can have severe legal consequences and outcomes, and sexual assault can also have some pretty severe negative mental health and behavioral health outcomes with that as well. So obviously we want to avoid or reduce having those negative consequences of day drinking. So, one of the first things to do is don't drink on an empty stomach. Make sure that you are eating something either before or while you are, participating in an activity that may or may not involve day drinking. If you're going out to brunch, make sure you get the full meal with a side of biscuits and gravy, as I would say. Um, and make sure that you are putting something in your body if you are also choosing to drink, because that'll help your body process everything a little bit better, and so that your body's not just processing alcohol on its own. Another big tip is to have a glass of water between drinks, and that'll also help with kind of spacing out the amount of time in which you're consuming drinks, and also keep you hydrated throughout the day, and making sure that you're like I said, staying hydrated, restoring what your body needs, and there's something else that your body is processing outside of just alcohol. The other big thing to really be aware of and make plans for is to get an Uber, a Lyft, or some kind of designated driver if you're driving to a specific location, or if you think you're gonna go from one place to the next while or during the time that you've been day drinking, or you can even walk to your destination. Wayne State's campus is it's pretty big and it's in Midtown of Detroit. There are a lot of places that you can go and you can park your car in lots or on side streets around campus, and park it there and leave it there and walk to whatever locations around campus that you're going to. And this is all just to, again, make sure that you're safe, and that you're also keeping other people safe as well. So, with that being said, we'll jump into the next main topic, which goes over a little bit more about hangovers, and what about well, all the things about a hangover, but also how you can prevent or kind of cure having a hangover as well. So, what is a hangover? It is defined as having, headache, nausea, diarrhea, fatigue, tiredness. Those are all of the more common main symptoms of a hangover. But also, you can have sensitivity to light or sound, vertigo, increased blood pressure, and then also, this is something that some people might not know about, but drinking too much or binge drinking can cause like sleep deprivation or it can disrupt your sleep cycle, which can really further exacerbate some of those, effects and symptoms of having a hangover as well. And so, when do hangovers begin? Well, they begin when your blood alcohol concentration, or what some other people refer to it as BAC, when those levels decrease back down to zero, that's when you'll start feeling those effects and those symptoms of a hangover. So you're probably wondering, how do I prevent one from happening? And if I get one, how do I cure it and get over those symptoms? Because they're not fun. They're not fun to have those symptoms. So to prevent a hangover, obviously the first one is to make sure that you are staying hydrated and drinking a ton of water if you are going to be engaging in drinking. So like I said before, having water in your body is going to keep you hydrated, going to help you process some of that alcohol, and obviously prevent a hangover depending on how much water that you're consuming along with the alcohol. Another thing, and I kind of touched base on this before, the time between having drinks is pretty important as well. And if you remember back to the binge drinking slide, we sort of talked about that time frame piece of 2 hours, and the time between having drinks can be really really influential to having a hangover or not, or really feeling those stronger effects of alcohol. So making sure that you're spacing out your drinks, and like I said, having water or eating food in between that time as well, is going to be super important. um, Obviously, another one is eating a well balanced meal before or while you're drinking, making sure that you're getting protein and carbs and some sugars, everything that you would want, in a regular meal. Especially getting something that might be a little bit on the saltier side. I included a picture of some ramen bowls over here because if you're a college student who doesn't like ramen, I know I had a lot of ramen when I was in college. And it's a saltier food. So, what it's going to do is it's going to hold on and retain some of that water in your body, and just sort of, again, cushion, the amount of alcohol that you're putting in your body and help prevent that hangover from happening later on. Other research that I recently read suggested that having zinc and B vitamins can be somewhat helpful in mitigating having a hangover. This is pretty new preliminary research, but it has been brought up in some different research papers across the board that I saw. So that might be something to consider as well in terms of preventing a hangover. Um, and then being aware of what you're drinking and when you're drinking things, again, that timing piece is going to be really influential. But as some of you might know, having a glass of beer is going to be different than having a drink like like a mixed drink, such as like a vodka soda. And then, if you're mixing those types of drinks around when you are engaging in drinking, that can, promote a hangover or maybe even worse effects down the road. So, really, again, being aware of what you're drinking, when you're drinking it, and all of those types of things. Um, so, on the flip side, curing a hangover, let me first start by saying that the hair of the dog that you may have heard of before is a pretty big myth. And there's a lot of research to back this up. So, having a drink after a night of already drinking is not going to do you any good. In fact, it's actually going to be worse for you. And scientists do say that you should wait at least 24 hours, if not 48 hours, before your next alcohol related consumption if you're hungover. So, again, keep that in mind. But there are other things that you can do. And some of those things include taking like a pain reliever, like an aspirin or something to kind of help with the effects of like a headache, those types of things. Obviously, another big one, and I know I sound like a broken record, but staying hydrated, drinking water is going to be super duper important. Uh, and you can have water, you can have Gatorade, those types of things to help get some sugar and electrolytes and nutrients back in your system. Help your body sort of replenish those things again. Also, another one that a lot of researchers suggest is just having carbohydrate-rich foods like toast, noodles, that sort of thing, just to make sure again that you're restoring yourself and all of your nutrients. Um, and then the National Health Service from the United Kingdom actually suggests that if you are feeling kind of like nauseated or if you have an upset stomach after drinking and when you're hungover, like bouillon soup can be really helpful for that upset stomach, but also making sure that you're getting what you need to put back in your body and replenishing and restoring again. Um, so that is all about Hangovers 101. And we are going to jump into our last topic before the panel discussion, which is all about post pandemic life, anxiety, and alcohol use. So I started with this slide just to kind of give input on the state of Michigan and Wayne State University and post-pandemic life related things. So both the state of Michigan and Wayne State have really worked diligently to the health and safety of its communities, and they're looking forward to Wayne State, is looking forward to inviting students back on campus at some point, as evidenced by this fall 2021 plan. They want to do so in a safe manner and make sure that they're still monitoring everything going on with COVID-19. And also, the state of Michigan, as of July 1st, which is very recently, has lifted all broad pandemic orders in the state. So while we're moving back to this new normal or this post-pandemic life, it can all be super duper exciting, but it also can be really really anxiety inducing for some people as well. Um, and it's kind of evidenced by this post-pandemic anxiety. This cartoon does a really nice job at showing what some people might be thinking about as we navigate back into a new normal or post-pandemic life. And to kind of back that up with a little bit of data and statistics again, 40 million adults in the United States have anxiety disorders. And this was, reported pre-pandemic as well. So I'm sure that number has probably changed a little bit since the pandemic. Social anxiety disorder affects approximately 15 million US adults, or 7% of the United States population, which is also a very, very big number. And then within the 40 million US adults, 20% of these adults have alcohol dependence or alcohol use disorders as well. So again, just thinking about these numbers and how they might, be implemental in this post-pandemic life and post-pandemic anxiety and moving back to, again, a new normal. Um, so the last slide that I have before the panel discussion starts is just like a good reflection of, the COVID-19 pandemic has really increased this general and social anxiety for people, which has probably, exacerbated or increased alcohol use in order to cope with, some of these anxieties and concerns revolving around the pandemic. And then this sort of translates into like what are the implications for this moving forward with college students who are starting to return to campus and are excited and looking forward to going back to campus life and social events, but also might be extremely nervous and how that might impact or reinforce alcohol use and using alcohol again to maybe cope with some of those anxieties or some of the nerves of being back on campus and being social again. So with that, I am going to introduce our panelists. And panelists, if you guys would like to, you can turn on your cameras. If whatever you prefer. I'm going to continue to keep my camera on during the panel today. And then I'm basically just going to introduce all of you right now, and then we'll start going through the questions together. So our first panelist is Louise Harder, who is a certified prevention specialist and the executive director for the Prevention Network in Michigan. Louise coordinates the Michigan Higher Education Network to support evidence-based prevention efforts on school campuses and works a lot with schools and partnerships across the state of Michigan on efforts such as this one. She was also named Michigan Preventionist of the Year in 2019 by the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. So congrats on that. It's very exciting. We also have Kirk Guanco from CAPS on campus here. Kirk is a licensed master's social worker and a certified addictions and drugs counselor. Kirk is interested in developing life skills to manage issues of depression, anxiety, adjustment, and substance abuse. And then we also have Robin Dover from Campus Health Center here at Wayne State. Robin is also a licensed master's social worker. She is interested in topics of depression, anxiety, integrated care, empowerment, coping with adjustment and life transitions, crisis intervention, clinical supervision, and mood and anxiety disorders. So I just want to say a big thank you to all three of you for being here today and sharing, your expertise and your experiences in the field. And that being said, we'll get started. So the first question I will give to Robin. So throughout the pandemic, what are some insights that you've gathered about the mental and behavioral health of students, especially when adjusting to different college experiences and different circumstances revolving around the pandemic?
Yeah, so the pandemic has made an already challenging adjustment for many college students, an even more difficult one. Traditionally, students struggle with mental health when they come to college due to the impact of high expectations, their social media, financial pressures. And during the pandemic, students had to navigate these challenges along with uncertainties that came along with the pandemic. So there was lots of pressure that students were feeling throughout this time, and lots of uncertainty that was difficult to navigate. So, due to this, many students experience just intense pressure, but along with that, feelings of self-doubt and inadequacy, And all of this has really had a big impact on their mental well-being as they've tried to adjust.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. If any of the other panelists, we're pretty good on time right now. So if any of you guys want to jump in and add anything to this question, go right ahead. If not, I can jump to the next question.
Well, I would say as well, kind of going on what Robin said, is that for a lot of the students, there was a major adjustment into, not only school, because, when this started, or prior to starting, everything was in person. And some students, really needed that in-person type of structure to help them, do well in school. And then all of a sudden switching to remote, they found out that a lot of their self-motivation and their own self-discipline had to come into play. So some people struggled with not having that structure in there, and then vice versa. Some people didn't like being online. Some people preferred being in person. Other people like being online and things like that. So there was just that piece. Then talking to some freshmen that started school, they kind of felt isolated, that they weren't really part of the college experience. Then the other side is that some people lost a year or graduation or something. So then it brings into the whole idea of life continued to happen even when school didn't. So there were a lot of students that kind of had to deal with, loss of jobs, loss of family members, just even switching to this whole idea of living in a pandemic world. So all that kind of compounded everything for just a student. So
Yeah.
it was just more than just the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point too. And I can say, speaking from a grad school student perspective, I personally, I like the online format of things, and I don't mind it from a learning perspective. But you absolutely miss out on that social aspect of things too, and that can be a lot more, I think, effective to an undergraduate population who really seeks out that social life as well. So yeah, thank you for that insight as well. So we can jump on to the next question. And Kirk, I was hoping you could also lead off this question. So in your experience and in your practice, what mental and behavioral health issues have been the most common against college students since the beginning of the pandemic? This is a little bit of a piggyback question, I guess, but
Yeah.
what have you seen so far that has, like I said, been the most common?
Yeah, well, a lot of anxiety, understandable, health anxiety about, either getting COVID or spreading it. There's a lot of that. A lot of, depression seemed to be kind of rampant. Um, dealing with, the isolation, um, not having outside, contact with people. Then again, grades affecting, their mental health, that they're worried about failing or noticing that they're not doing as well. Um, you know, things of that nature. It's still the same things that still cause people, failing grades or whatnot, but it was just a different type of, I guess, scenario with, what was going on. And again, in my experience, it seemed like, I would say most often it was definitely, brought into or tied to some sort of, isolation and lack of being around people and the support they would normally have. Not being able to seek that out was, weighing heavily on a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Louise or Robin, if you guys have anything else to add to that question too.
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit. I agree. And I want to preface that whatever I say, it's not necessarily, I'm not on Wayne State University's college campus. So when I speak, it may not necessarily be specific to that student population, but I am starting to look at it, which does make a difference. But I am starting to look at some of the national data and the statewide data and some of the information that's coming out, because we're just starting to see just glimpses of some of that. You're absolutely, I mean, and the national data echoes the increase in depression, anxiety, especially stress around financial stress, which is interesting, makes a lot of sense as students are kind of navigating the pandemic. The other piece that I found was kind of interesting. The students are reporting lower levels of psychological well-being post-pandemic relative to fall of 2019 when they're saying pre-pandemic. But there's higher levels of resiliency. And I thought that was really interesting, but I'm wondering if part of it's like, let's band together throughout the pandemic and how do we get through this and find other coping mechanisms and supports. And so I thought that was really interesting. Again, that's at the national level. That may or may not be specific to Wayne State students. The other piece that I do want to note, and we started talking about this, the headlines and the information about day drinking, alcohol sales skyrocketing, the cannabis sales skyrocketing, which are true statements and headlines. But we also want to be very careful in the language and how we talk to students about this, because when we're looking at college students and college campuses, we're not necessarily seeing those same increases into the same levels. The reason students tend to drink on college campuses, at least I should say a majority of the drinking, and especially more moderate drinking, tends to be in social situations. And so with the pandemic, that first week for sure, with that transition, students weren't necessarily home yet, and it ended up being like spring break part 2. But after that, you really saw a decrease or a level off of the drinking rates. And a lot of students actually said, I'm drinking less now that I'm home because I'm with my parents. I'm not out with friends. I'm not going out to the bars on the weekend, things like that. And so being very careful and mindful. There were definitely a percentage of students, especially those who are high risk, that did increase their drinking and use that as a coping mechanism, but that was not by no means the majority. And so something I've been kind of trying to reiterate to, especially college professionals, is making sure that we're very careful about how we talk about this as we move forward, because the whole everybody's drinking or there were huge increases during the pandemic, while well-intended, could be detrimental or harmful, because there were actually a lot of students who also didn't drink. And so looking at that, you know, campus specific data and sharing, well, there actually, you know, there were a lot of students that decided to cut back on their drinking or maintain the same amount of drinking. And that's okay. Like wherever you're at, that's okay. And we can work with you.
Yeah, that's great to note too. And I did read something about that somewhere where it was like more college students since the pandemic, when they were home, they were just having maybe a glass of wine or a beer with their parents at dinner, and it was only limited to you know, to 1 or 2 drinks. And I'm curious as to how that narrative might change, and like you said, what we can do for what the type of language that we're using as we return back to campus, and how do we you know, I guess still promote that decrease in drinking and binge drinking particularly. So thank you for bringing that up. Robin, do you have anything else to add to that question, or do you want me to move on?
My response might actually take us a bit into the next question, just kind of piggybacking a bit on what Louise was saying. You know, but I think it just really speaks to the importance, like you were saying, of how we speak to college students about alcohol use, but also just the importance of providing them all of this education and putting this into perspective for them so that students can make good decisions when it comes to their alcohol consumption. So you putting the information out there and letting them know what's really going on for their own perspective and for their own decision making, I think is really important.
Definitely. All right. So with that being said, yeah, I will jump into the next question, which Louise, if you can start us off with this one. It's a little bit of a longer one, so bear with me. How does research or the research on increased alcohol sales and use during the pandemic play a role in alcohol use specific among college students? This is kind of what we were just talking about. And I guess are there any findings that surprised you or were informative in your practice? And again, I know you've kind of answered some of this, but if you have anything else to add, go for it.
All right. Yeah, sorry, I jumped ahead. I totally forgot what the next question was, and I already spoke on to a lot of it. And I don't want to speak to future questions. So hopefully, cross my fingers, I don't do that again. But yes, we did see a decrease well, I wouldn't say necessarily a decrease. It's really, in some of the information, it's coming out of the University of Washington, is where I'm seeing a lot of the preliminary information and data around the pandemic and students' mental health and well-being. And then substance misuse. And it is decreasing, but it really depends on that population. And so I think throughout the pandemic, really taking a more individualized approach or a smaller group target population-based approach, rather than looking at students at large, could be really helpful. And then I think that also translates to moving forward, kind of continuing to look, because I think different groups are going to see different responses as and I'll talk more about that, or I don't want to, I'll save the response for a future question too, but I think a lot of it will translate out into kind of moving forward specific target groups and where we want to provide extra supports to based on what we saw during the pandemic in specific populations.
Right, absolutely. All right. Does anyone else have anything to add to that question? Maybe something that you read somewhere in an article or something interesting or insightful about that were relative to the pandemic and alcohol use among college students?
I would say, like, I think it is appropriate to, look at, specific groups, because I think, Luis just said it was, like the fraternity situation, or like, that population versus, the people living in the residence hall or freshmen or, graduate students. And particularly to Wayne, I'm saying Wayne, it is a majority of a commuter school. So it's even communicating to people like not on campus about, how things might be affecting them differently than students on campus. But I also did kind of piggyback on before, like hearing the idea of the college use of alcohol actually did decrease because of the social gatherings and people were like staying at home. So maybe even just communicating to maybe like parents a little bit more as well about having that type of influence if their college student has to be tends to be living at home, might be beneficial as well.
Yeah, that's a good point too about communicating with parents and maybe sort of promoting that, so something how they can be influential in that process as well. Awesome. So the next question that I do have, Kirk, if you don't mind answering this one and leading us off, what do you think is the most stressful situation or component for students that are returning to campus, post-pandemic for this upcoming fall semester?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. I would say typically, I think for students coming back or coming to, school, it's, the idea of like fitting in and, how like things are going to go for them, just in college. But with the pandemic, I'm saying my guess, best guess right now is basically the transition back to school and what is going to be safe and, what isn't, that, because even like right now, I don't think there is necessarily like a clear cut, strategy per se, or, you know, if all classes are going to be in, you know, in person, you know, what all the rules are going to be. And so there's still kind of like that unknown that I think could possibly affect people's, you know, mental health and just their own levels of stress and anxiety. And we know that, you know, constant stress and anxiety, you know, is not, you know, good for people. And that can snowball into, you know, other, you know, substance use or vice versa, substance use. And so it can be kind of difficult to really pinpoint what would be like the most, the biggest issue coming back with the pandemic, I guess, situation. But in general, I think it's probably going to be, again, just how the semester really is going to go for them and what to expect, and worry about possibly if it is, you know, knock on wood, like this Delta variant, if it, like all of a sudden like that is going to be, you know, an issue here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's another point of concern, and you know why we're still really monitoring the situation closely, especially on Wayne State's campus. I think they're doing a really good job at being aware of all of the changes and things that are going on too. Robin or Louise, if you guys have anything to add to that question.
Yeah, I totally agree with Kirk that it's, you know, hard to pinpoint down what the most stressful thing is going to be. But again, here we're approaching another time of adjustment. And there's been all kinds of adjustment throughout the pandemic. And just like thinking about having to approach that again can be pretty stressful for students, especially in wake of the uncertainty like Kirk was talking about. You know, it's a lot more difficult to plan for something and have expectations and manage anxiety about it when you don't know what to expect, when it is uncertain. So I think that's a big challenge for students as they think about the coming fall semester and what that looks like and what it will be like for them in particular. In addition to that, if we are, you know, going back to in-person activities on campus, there's the social component. And what I'm hearing from a lot of students that I'm doing counseling with is that they're really nervous and anxious about how to interact socially when they're physically in a space with people, because a lot of them haven't done it for a long time, or they've only done that around family members or close friends that they're comfortable with and used to. So doing this with new people, with strangers, it's pretty nerve-wracking for a lot of students. They're also worried about how to interact with, not just interact with people, but how to interact in group settings, and what to do in groups and how to manage anxieties about that, especially in wake of the pandemic too. And they're having their safety and health in mind as a consideration. How do they maintain their health and safety, but have this social aspect too in that group setting? So I think the social component can definitely offer a lot of stress for students as they think about coming back to possibly in-person activities.
Totally. Yeah, I completely agree with you on that one. I think the social piece is going to be really big too. And so I'll jump into the next question. Well, this is, I guess, a little bit of a follow-up question, and Robin, you might have already sort of answered a little bit of it, but if you could lead us off on this one too, how do you think alcohol might play a role in these stressful situations or anxieties for college students who are coming back to campus?
Sure. Yeah, well, historically, something we know is that people have turned to alcohol consumption as a means of dealing with stress, anxiety, depression, among other things. We also know that leaving for college as a freshman, or even now in these circumstances where there may be students who have started school but haven't come to campus yet in person, they're coming for the first time, that can come with some increases in drinking. And something we know in addition to that is that the first 6 weeks of that adjustment can be a really vulnerable time. So that is definitely something to be mindful of. Knowing this is a time of stress for them, you know, thinking about how we help them. And that may go back to some of those education pieces and lead us into our final question. I know that's coming up on the horizon. Another thing, you mentioned earlier, Taylor, that there may be some excitement surrounding restrictions lessening and surrounding getting back to some what we would think would be normal campus life. You know, and with that, there would be lots of celebratory behaviors that come into play. Parties might be happening, or people are meeting with their friends at bars and clubs and that sort of thing. So, you know, all this in mind, there's potential for definite increases in alcohol consumption as people do think about coming back.
Definitely. Yeah. Does anyone else have anything to add to that, or I can move on to the last one? All right, I will jump to the last one. And Louise, if you could start us off with this question. What are some tips to preventing binge drinking and or alcohol use as a coping mechanism for like re-entering into campus and social life and all of the events post-pandemic?
That's a great question. And I think I'm going to pull together a lot of what's already been said as well, because I think it all kind of plays into kind of next steps and how to move forward. So as far as moving forward, I definitely think the social situations and social interactions, the pandemic is not over. And I'm seeing a lot of people, and I say that in a variety of different ways. We're still trying to navigate. It's still up in the air. Maybe a semester ago, I had a student reach out to me and said, well, college is going really well, but they keep sending out new emails or information of updates and policy. And it's like they're flying by the seat of their pants and don't know what's going on. And a week later, it all changes. And I said, well, let you in on a little secret. They are flying by the seat of their pants. Things are changing so rapidly. No one really, I mean, you've just got to, that's been the year, right? So we've all been trying to navigate that. And I don't anticipate that I think we're starting to kind of prepare a little bit further out than just, hey, for the next week, this is going to be the guideline. We're planning a lot more for the fall and kind of reopening and trying to put together as comprehensive of a plan as possible for students to prepare for. However, I don't think that's 100% there yet. And I'm sure there will be some changes and some pieces that excuse me, everyone's going to have to adapt to. So I think keeping in mind that the other thing in the social interactions, and then, you know, the varying degrees of students who are ready to get back, and I'm ready to go out with a large group of people, and those who are really nervous and unsure about mask usage versus not, vaccine hesitancy versus not, and some of those components as well. The other piece we talked about, and it was mentioned before about Wayne State being a commuter college. So that piece is helpful in a lot of students probably, or likely, a good majority of students already know the area, but they may not know campus, and they may not, you know, we now almost have double the amount of, and I use that in loose quotations, we almost have double the amount of first-time students on campus experiencing the full college experience. And I mean that to say, you know, a lot of the freshmen and sophomores that are going to be coming in this year are going to be brand new to the college physical environment. And so kind of adapting and prepping for that. The other piece is the myths that have been perpetuated over the years. So everybody drinks on college campuses, or I've got to make up for last year because I missed out on that experience, or whatever other stories might be playing out. So I think the first step to really to prevention is really going to be honest and upfront and transparent about, you know, there are a lot of things changing. There is a lot going on. How can we work to support each other as we continue to navigate these weathers? Because it's not fully over. It's not like, you know, that was last year, this semester is going to be 100% perfect and back to normal. The other piece is really trying to share that, you know, there are a lot of students who don't drink, and it's okay not to drink on campus. Instead of saying everybody drinks, let's talk about harm reduction only. Harm reduction is great, don't get me wrong, and you definitely need that as part of your prevention. And harm reduction, for those just to make sure everyone knows, really, if you choose to drink, here's how to do it safely. And that's an important component, but that can't be the only component to prevention, because otherwise you're telling students it's okay to drink and it's normal to drink, and it may not be. And it's okay not to drink. And use that. It's also watching out not only for the first 6 weeks, like Robin mentioned, definitely the red zone is what I call it, and a period to be aware of or leery of, but really to expand even further. I'm anticipating even longer than 6 weeks, because I'm back on campus. We're going to replay, 2 years in one. So things like Halloween, I anticipate, or other marker holidays, to be even bigger than they were beforehand, or potentially bigger days where we need to increase prevention messaging and harm reduction messaging around. And so I think being cognizant of those pieces and incorporating that, and then increase supports. We talk about, stress reduction strategies and stress less days on campus, or you bring the dogs in so they can pet, instead of just doing those around finals or midterms like I see most campuses do. Really incorporating more stress management tools and coping strategies throughout the year, so students have those throughout, and maybe even expand upon or teaching faculty and staff how to kind of look out for some of those mental health concerns that students may be experiencing, the signs and symptoms, and where to reach out on campus to connect students to the resources that they need.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with that. And that was kind of a little bit of a follow-up question that I had under this was, what are some resources that we can provide on campus? And Kirk or Robin, if you have any resources that you want to, share with the group, or anything that you want to add to that question as well, please feel free to do so.
From a national level, before I let people share more specific, which are very helpful, and at a national level, I would recommend in everybody the SPIF strategic prevention framework, and utilizing public health frameworks and models could be really helpful. And that's just looking at the needs assessment, building capacity, and planning is going to be really helpful. And then that way you can target it specific to WSU and making sure it's specific. The other piece is College AIM, the Alcohol Intervention Matrix, that was created by the NIAAA, and it's a fantastic resource for primarily alcohol misuse prevention on college campuses. And it breaks it out into, there's like a little matrix. It breaks it out into high effectiveness, moderate effectiveness, low effectiveness, or no effectiveness, or no known effectiveness. And then it also breaks it out into columns with low cost, moderate cost, and high cost. So that's a really good tool for schools to look at and determine what's a good prevention strategy to use on campus. So if you have nowhere else to start, use that. And then I'm sure you have counseling services that you two can share as well.
Yeah, so like with just the in-house type of, resources, like, obviously CAPS, we have a nice website that kind of gives a lot of strategies and coping skills and to students and faculty, but, other tells, people how to get involved with our services for, counseling. There's Doso's office that has some, messaging out there for how students can get involved and have other ways to, link up to people and, be part of the community. I think it's important, like Louise was saying, was that, in a way you're giving other people like other options if there's other things to do than just, partying or whatnot, but there's other things to get involved in. And, it's shown that, being involved in things, having, like doing something for the community or other organizations kind of can be like, a beneficial coping mechanism, stress reduction type of thing as well. We do, and forgive me, I do not have it in front of me, but there has been, there's some AA support groups that are local here that, working with students, previously that, kind of mentioned that one of the things that they didn't necessarily like about some of the groups that they would go to in the community is that they were finding that they didn't necessarily look like themselves. They didn't see themselves represented, age group or even just like in the area. So we were able to, I had some people involved in those groups that gave me some resources of more AA groups geared towards or more of the younger crowd or college age crowd. Then there's also like female only AA groups that, some people might find more comfortable, to do that. So I don't know if there's a way that if you can give my email out or whatnot, just in case someone, would want that information, it's definitely available.
All right, thank you so much. Well, we are in the last 2 minutes of the hour, and I did say that I would leave some time for questions. So if anyone in the group today does have any questions, if you want to unmute or, if you want to put it in the chat, you can do that. But thank you to our panelists for you guys for being here today and for answering all of these questions. And again, sharing your expertise and your experiences from your practices and just all of the information that you guys had today. This was great. It was super nice to hear from all of you and your different backgrounds as well. And I will flip through to my literature cited and to the Q&A page here. So if anyone has any questions, just pop it in the chat. But with that being said, we are done with the official part of the webinar today. So thank you all for coming out and watching the webinar, the presentation, and hearing the panel. And I hope you took away some really good, insightful information on this topic. So, all right. I don't know if I should end my screen sharing or if I should keep this up for a minute. I'll keep it up for a minute if anyone wants to stay on.